Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to see you again. My name is Dustin Cormier. Welcome to How to Rock Astrology. Today we're going to be continuing our series, Interpreting the Outer Planets. In particular, we're going to be looking at... Oh, great, I lost my thing. We are going to be looking at the auspiciousness of the planets involved with an outer planet. So, there we go. Auspiciousness to the Lagna in particular. Now we can see here I've written that Auspicious Yogas contains within it auspiciousness to the Lagna. Auspicious Yogas is kind of like an umbrella term for that, because the Lagna, as we're going to see, is the life path, it's the ascendant, the rising sign. It's kind of like, it's something we keep with us all the time. It's the most natural, inherent expression mode of the entire soul. Every planet expresses through the Lagna a little bit. And those planets that are conducive to the energy and nature of the Lagna give us an easier time in relating to this essential part of ourselves, this essential part of our soul, which is the Lagna, the rising sign. So when an outer planet's lord is friendly to the Lagna in our whole lives have an easier time dealing with it. This makes it more stable, makes it more conducive to positive alchemy, and gives us a better grasp of how to deal with it. Although, if we have an outer planet in a sign that is antagonistic to the Lagna, it also means that there's something important there. It means perhaps that our Lagna energy, the dimensions of ourselves which relates to the Lagna and the rising sign, and which are friendly to our Lagna, perhaps we have too much of an emphasis on this, on the security that relates with ourselves, the first house. Perhaps we need to develop more on the seventh house and those things that are outside of the nature of our Lagna. So having an inauspicious house lord holding an outer planet energy is not a bad thing, and we're going to talk about that. So just know that auspicious yogas is kind of like a big term for talking about not only the yogas in a chart, but also the auspiciousness to the Lagna. This is going to be a huge part of defining the nature of the outer planet. That's why I've kind of put it first. So keep that in mind. The first thing we did in our last video, we talked about the outer planet's agenda, which if you remember correctly, we were talking from Isabel Hickey's Cosmic Science, talking about, for Charlie Sheen's chart, having Pluto and Uranus in the 4th house. Now we're going to be starting to quantify what is the nature of Mercury for a Gemini rising, which is Charlie Sheen's chart, as we're going to see here eventually. But one thing at a time. Yogas are a complex subject. I plan on doing videos specifically speaking to yogas eventually, so stay tuned. For now, since this is a crash course on the outer planets, we speak to the yogas at a rudimentary level. And we'll go into more detail about yogas, particularly in later case studies. Yogas are the crown of a chart, the crown jewel, if and when there are yogas with strength presented in a chart. Not everyone does. Charlie Sheen's doesn't have any super crazy yogas to speak of. This is just a preliminary, because in the schema, if someone does have yogas, I guess I should say this way, if someone does have yogas, it's the first thing that should be cognized, and things in the chart should move around that central spine of the yoga, because it can contain great power if and when there's a positively expressed powerful yoga in the chart. It's the highest cosmic redemption for the soul that we can get when we have a yoga configuration in the chart, as we're going to talk about. So that's why we have it first. And I should say that we put the yogas first because it's this crown jewel. So anyway, let's just rock and roll. This page here is giving a brief description of yogas. I mean, a yoga can be a combination of two meaningful planets being together. Remember that the root for the word yoga is yuj, which means union. It's like the yoke of an ox cart. So it means the unifying of two different things, for better or worse. Usually to make something which is greater than the sum of its parts, but that can be negative or positive. So, a yoga can combine two meaningful planets together. It can mean the combination of a house lord in a house. It's something called the Bhava Yogas, which is, for example, in Charlie Sheen's chart, he has the fourth lord, Mercury, because Virgo is his fourth house. His fourth lord, which is Mercury, is in his third house, which is Leo. That's a Bhava Yoga. Fourth lord in the third house. You're combining two different elements together. Fourth house and the third house. This also can be planets combined with sensitive mathematical points like Rahu and Ketu, the 10th house cusp, the Lagna, etc. So many types of yogas. Another layer of Charlie Sheen's chart that we're going to analyze succinctly is, this is a huge part of the outer planets agenda, actually. Uranus and Pluto are in Virgo. I mean, I feel like I should just, for the sake of everything here, as we've said. Gemini rising, it's Charlie Sheen. We have Pluto, Uranus in Virgo, and they are in the fourth sign from Gemini. We'll call it the fourth house. And their energies lean on Mercury in order to express themselves. Now, the fourth lord, the lord which is carrying this Pluto and Uranus and Sun energy, of course, is Mercury. The fourth lord is in the third house. So when we read about the fourth house agenda of Uranus and Pluto in the fourth house, we have to consider that the fourth house is channeling and expressing itself through the third house. And that's why at the end of this video, we're going to talk about what it's like to have your fourth lord in the third house. Now, another yoga, which we would call, is whenever there's any combination of planets succinctly involving themselves together. The combination of two planets as life direction carriers counts as a certain yoga, though they might not always be auspicious. This involves defining the house lord as a carrier of one of four Vedic directions. The Dharma houses are the 1st, 5th, and 9th lords. The Artha houses and lords are the 2nd and 6th and 10th lord in the chart. The Kama houses are 3, 7, and 11th house. Of course, these relate to the signs, right? Gemini is an air sign. It's Kama, and it relates to the 3rd house. Libra is the 7th sign, relates to the 7th house. Aquarius is the 11th sign, relates to the 11th house. All three of those are air signs, right? So we've got like fire houses, earth houses, air houses, and water houses, the moksha houses. Each of these four are a different reason for living, a different excitement, a different energy. And they're all important. Ideally, they should all be in a balance. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm looking at here. I hope. Good. In Charlie Sheen's chart, we'll observe the questionable condition of a Kama Moksha Yoga that occurs by combining his third lord, the Sun, which is a Kama planet because in a Gemini rising chart, as we can see, Gemini is the 1st house, Cancer is the 2nd house, Leo is the 3rd house. Leo's the 3rd lord. The 3rd house relates to the 3rd sign of Gemini, which is air, which is Kama. Kama meaning desire. So we observe this yoga, it's a Kama Moksha Yoga, by combining Charlie Sheen's 3rd lord, a Kama lord, with the 4th lord, which is a Moksha lord. The 4th house carries moksha energy. Moksha means liberation. It means finding an enjoyable outlet for one's creative and spiritual energies. That's what liberation means. A lot of people take the word moksha, and there's a deeper context for moksha, which means purifying karma. It can mean experiencing transcendental, experiencing pain in order to be uplifted to a transcendental experience and understanding of oneself through the activity of oneself. That's why the 4th house is all about contemplation, and so is the 8th in a way, and the 12th. So here we have the moksha lord, Mercury, the lord of the 4th house, in yoga with the 3rd lord, the sun. And this is they're getting this to what's called a mutual yoga, where each planet is in the sign that the other rules. Again, I can just show you real quick that we see that Mercury is in Leo's house, and the sun is in Mercury's house, in Virgo. So, sun in Mercury's house, Mercury in the sun's house. That's what we mean by that mutual yoga. Blah, blah, blah. What this is going to bring is, I've got a snippet of what this might bring. It's moksha, it's liberation, plus kama, which is desire. This means an enjoyment, kama, of finding liberation and creative, loving freedom, moksha. This can be good, but it can also be bad, because we also see here that part of one's moksha, the 4th house, is tied and binded to kama, which is desire. So this person seeks freedom, seeks self-liberation. Part of the way in which this person knows how to find a place of inner peace and acceptance of themselves is through desire, is through the aggressiveness of the 3rd lord, the aggressive, exploring, unsatisfiable action of the 3rd house. This can lead to him being insatiable, to someone being unsatisfiable, especially if the lords aren't well placed. If the lord was well placed, then they might find a lot of satisfaction, although the 3rd lord is never a good lord to combine with anything. So we're going to see how this is tough on Charlie Sheen's 4th house in particular, especially because those heavy outer planets are there, seeking a transcendental experience beyond the senses, beyond security, beyond the mind, for a deep level of freedom and self-realization. But it is completely always being uprooted by the sun's desire first to experience a sensation that will manifest a gritty, aggressive happiness from the 3rd lord, the sun, being there. Once again, just to show you what I mean. The 3rd lord, the sun, is in that 4th house, and this deeply stilts and hurts the nature of the 4th house. And we're going to talk about why. So, before we get into any of this stuff in deeper detail, this is what we want to talk about today. We want to discuss what it is that makes a planet auspicious to the Lagna. It's the auspiciousness of a planet to the Lagna that brings out the best of that planet's nature, as the Lagna represents the constant natural life path of the soul. So, under the umbrella of Auspicious Yogas, we are looking at the auspiciousness of any planet to the Lagna. The Lagna, the ascendant, defines the general tone of all the planets in a horoscope by their geometry from the ascendant in the equal house system. Vedic astrology does consider house cusps. It's kind of a both-and sort of thing, but the equal house system always has a basic understanding and container of the house lords. No matter what, if you're a Leo, Libra is your 3rd lord, even though the 3rd cusp might fall into Virgo, in which case the 2nd house also, Virgo, also holds the 3rd house energy in a lot of ways. They're kind of blended in that way. That's our idea. I digress. This isn't a lesson on cusps. Now, this little bit that we're about to read comes from Brihat Parashara Horashastra. A planet is auspicious if it relates to the first house, the fifth house, or the ninth house. Let's say Gemini rising, Mercury rules the first house, so it's almost always guaranteed to have a good, positive auspiciousness to it and is necessary. No matter how it's placed, where it's placed, it's necessary for the grace of the soul. Same thing with the first and the ninth house and lord. A planet is generally evil if it relates to the third house, the sixth house, or the 11th house. These are evil houses whose egoic, aggressive nature can cause more trauma than good and can be yoga breakers. If any of these lords are found within a prospective yoga between two planets that might have some brilliant luck and spiritual fortune to it, the 3rd, 6th, or 11th lord, if combined with that, can be a yoga breaker. And the evil intent of these houses can cripple the prospective capacities of that great yoga. The 7th and 2nd houses have killer marika qualities, which are not necessarily, they're this cutting energy. They're a necessary energy. And in the older years, if you haven't figured out your 7th and your 2nd house, they might end up killing you by being just the nature of the direness of them. They'll kind of just wipe you out because they can be so strange. If you have an ill-placed 7th lord, by the time you get older, the world will draw you to experiences that are new eventually. And if you've never dealt with that before, then it could kill you. That's what these marika houses are about. But they're not always bad. The 2nd can be quite neutral, but they are always given these killer marika qualities by Brihat Parashara Horashastra. Cardinal houses are generally auspicious if ruled by a malefic. The reason for that is because malefics are driven through pressures to create and advance through pressures outside of itself and for causes outside of itself. That's the Sun, Mars, Saturn, and Mercury if it's placed with another malefic. And also the Moon if it is ahead of the full moon. Right? If it's past the full moon, the moon is like waning and it's considered a malefic. And if that rules a cardinal angle, it's considered a good thing because malefics cause us to malefics on an angle cause us to grittily move forward in the world no matter what. Benefics on the angles can be a bit lazy, and they're actively let go or let the activity move through them, which doesn't create the opportunity and manifest the opportunity and reality that we expect out of a creative yoga. There are exceptions to these general rules, but they're generally true. As we can see, the source is Brihat Parashara Horashastra, a la Ryan Kirksack's Asheville Tropical Vedic Astrology Apprenticeship Program. This is kind of where I get all this stuff. So we're going to see a diagram where we're talking about how certain houses are auspicious for the Lagna and certain houses are not auspicious because of the relationship of the lords of those houses to the Lagna. And every Lagna has a different, slightly different rules and slightly different way of being. Now, it's easy to say that, when we see a positive, auspicious house, it's like, oh, that must be good. But does that mean that the inauspicious houses aren't good? What we have to understand is that we need, like everybody, you can only be going in one cosmic direction at a time with any force. If we are splayed into all 7 zodiacal directions at once, we wouldn't have a sun. We would just have like space. The sun is what comes through a particular direction. And all of our energy through the Lagna and through the sun generally comes through the Lagna being one-sided in a certain ways, we're going to see that, fire and air signs work well together and air and earth signs work well together, generally. So we'll find that, for example, in a Gemini Lagna, we'll find that the planets that rule air and earth signs are beneficial and helpful. Gemini, Mercury rules the first house and the fourth house. Venus rules the fifth house. Remember, the fifth house was one of our auspicious ones, right? And then guess what rules the ninth house? That's right, it's Aquarius. All three air signs are, of course, auspicious to the Lagna, and they're planets. So Gemini, Mercury rules the first and fourth, and it's auspicious. Venus rules the auspicious fifth and the neutral 12th. And the auspiciousness of the fifth house overrides the neutralness of the 12th and paints it white, paints it positive. Saturn rules the unstable 8th house, but it also rules the 9th. Am I missing anything here? I'm going to get to that. Saturn rules the unstable 8th house, but also the auspicious 9th house. In my opinion, I would say Ryan and David Frawley have given this a neutrality. And Parashara doesn't actually outline a direct sense of auspiciousness for Saturn for a Gemini Lagna. Saturn is more auspicious to other Lagnas. Gemini in particular is funny because Mercury is like, one of its friends is the sun. So it blends into that fire and water universe in a funny way, more than Venus and Saturn do. This is part of the reason why Saturn and Mercury are more neutral to each other than auspicious, but I would still call Saturn generally auspicious. This is the kind of thing you've got to be thinking about with every Lagna, is that it has strengths and it has weaknesses. Consider that the sun rules the evil third house. The sun for any Gemini is hard to satisfy. It's aggressive, and it's generally inauspicious. Although if it's well placed, it can do well. If it's in the 10th house and it's exalted, then its nature satisfies its aggressiveness, and it can be very good. These can be good business people, good martial artists, good Gemini risings are always. The sun is in the third house, interestingly, because Gemini is the third sign. So no matter where the sun is, it has this aggressive quality, which can be good or bad. But either way, if it's good, placed well or not placed well, you got to use it. Same thing with Jupiter. Rules the Marca 7th and the 10th, and it's a benefic. Benefics are generally too lazy to deal with angular house activity. They draw it in. Oh, just everything's going to be fine with my 7th house. Everything's going to be fine with my 10th house. And it's considered inauspicious for this reason. Although Jupiter's a benefic, so wherever it is, it's going to do well. It's not a bad thing to have, even though Jupiter's inauspicious, which is something we're going to read soon. Now we can see there's this picture of the auspicious and inauspicious planets in every yoga, every Lagna. Every Lagna has like a good side and a bad side. And that's why this is here, okay? Think of it this way. It's not that your inauspicious planets are unimportant. They are a shadow side, and they're just as important as the light, easy, attractive, natural elements of the Lagna, okay? Planets that are auspicious to the Lagna are like water in a bucket, and we're carrying it. We've got something to do in this life. Everybody's got something to do, something constructive, some positive, constructive sacrifice for the soul that is being buoyantly pushed forward from the positive karmas of the past. Inauspicious planets are like holes in the bucket. And let's say that every bucket has holes. You shouldn't be embarrassed for your inauspicious planets, for having tough houses that are just a natural refraction of your having put energy into your positive houses in your past lives. So there's always bound to be holes because we can't take up all space all the time with our consciousness, or else we wouldn't be the individual that we are. So those holes, the inauspicious planets, the shadows, the part that we aren't used to dealing with, they're important. Because if you ignore your inauspicious houses, it doesn't matter how well placed your auspicious good planets to the Lagna are, the water will fall through the holes. The water will fall through your inauspicious planets if you ignore them. The idea is to patch the hole. Patch up those ill parts of your planets. You don't have to get them all. You don't have to be neurotically neglecting the positive dimensions of your chart, but there's a balance to be found. So patching a hole, meaning having good karma for an auspicious planet, is just as important as acting on the positive luck of your auspicious planets. And having good luck with an auspicious planet can be a very good thing. That is an inauspicious planet, because that deeply reduces the holes, so that anything you do with your positive karma will probably be good. It's like questionable. It's interesting to think about. What's better, having like all positive yogas but with a bunch of holes in it, or having like an okay average positive yogas, not yogas, but positively placed planets. If you're a Gemini rising, your Mercury is placed okay, but the shadow side of your third lord isn't bothering too much of anything. Your inauspicious seventh lord, Jupiter, is well placed and it's not bothering anybody too much either. Your Saturn is well placed. All these malefic influences, if they're all balanced and flowing, then even if you've only got a little bit of power of good planets, you're not losing anything. Your karma is, it's like the little bit of karma going up is more special and purposeful in finding balance. It can be just as balanced as somebody who rips out their hair, ignoring their inauspicious houses. If you've got a strong Lagna but a weak seventh house, you ignore your wife and all of that just because your first house is so good. It's hard to say who eventually finds the equilibrium and positive ultimate sum of effort for results and reward and awakened Christ consciousness throughout the life. It's an interesting thing to think about. A certain dimension of balance. But I digress. The Lagna, the ascendant, defines the general tone of all the planets in the horoscope. And every Lagna has a different relationship with all of the planets. Generally, planets and signs that rule water and fire work well together. I'm a Leo rising. I generally do well with with planets that rule water and fire signs. That's like Jupiter, which is Sagittarius and Pisces, the Moon, which is Cancer, Mars, which is Scorpio and Aries, and the Sun, which is Leo. It's basically those four, right? A Leo rising, any fire and water rising can get along with those four planets. Any air or earth sign gets along well with Saturn, Mercury, and Venus, right? So, that being the case, you're always going to have half light and half shadow. Generally, everybody has one or the other. Now, considering this in terms of the outer planet's lord, let's say you've got an outer planet lord in a certain place that you have to deal with. Let's say it's in your inauspicious 6th house. It can be tough because you have to deal with your 6th house. But if your 6th house lord is well placed, you're going to have to deal with some tough stuff if you've got an outer planet there, no matter what. But how you get through that toughness, whether you learn from that toughness, could teach you to be very tough and endure, to have a very good sense of scheduling and rhythm, and have all the stabilization needed to get through some very difficult and tough times. And those outer planets will probably force you to have tough times. And this, if the 6th house and lord are well placed, have positive aspects and all these things, you will carry that tough energy with grace. It'll be a great ringing of those karmas in this life that you've been pushed into, where you could be like poor, but you have exactly the materials and resources needed to get through your struggles, and that's like glorious because of the struggles. Neptune or Uranus or Pluto ill-placed in the 6th, if the 6th lord is not in a good place, you'll have a hard time. You might not learn from it, and it'll just be this constant bane, this thing that is always in your life that will give you the lesson and give you a hard time, right? So the 6th house and its lord are generally ill to the Lagna, although not always, right? You could have like for Cancer rising, I believe Sagittarius and Pisces are ruled by Jupiter. Sagittarius rules the 6th house for Cancer. Pisces rules the 9th, which is auspicious. So if you have outer planets in Sagittarius and you're a Cancer rising, it's not necessarily such a bad thing, because Jupiter's also the 9th lord. So Jupiter will bring this 6th house energy through the outer planets in a tough, bearing way, which will give you trials and cause you to stabilize yourself. It'll generally probably be okay. Although if Jupiter's really, really ill-placed and bad and wasteful and excessive and, is in close to the 7th house and is like debilitated and all these things, the outer planet energy will essentially be wasted. So these are things we've got to think about, right? This is setting up the conception of how the outer planet is going to be dealt with in relationship to the Lagna. The less harmonious now to your outer planet's lord is with the Lagna, the harsher its results will be, because the ascendant represents the natural life path. Sometimes it may be a necessary balancing act in the psyche if the Lagna has too much influence on one's energy field, right? So that means that if an outer planet's lord is antagonistic to the Lagna, then there'll be this annoying duality that needs to be confronted in this life, which can be a very tricky thing to do. If you have an ill-placed thing and it's dragging you around, you've got to find some way to keep doing what else you do in your life while also feeding whatever that beast is that the outer planet represents. And that's just could be the lesson of this life for you. In any case, inauspicious planets still must be used. If they're well placed, they will be mostly insulated from the evil karmas. If not, they will express their inauspiciousness, right? Again, it's a hole in the bucket. If it's well placed, then it's been patched. It's not that big a deal, and it can hold much water. If it's not well placed, then it will express the negative qualities that are antagonistic to the Lagna, because it has to, because that outer planet has an agenda. So this is Gemini Lagna. This comes from Brihat Parashara Horashastra. In particular, it's coming from my teacher, Ryan Kirksack. That's who made this diagram. Okay. So now we're finally getting into Charlie Sheen's chart. Let's just take a little peeksy-poo here. The Lagna defines the general tone, and we can see that the Lagna is Gemini. Now, I'm primarily, as we can see, this is mostly a Vedic astrology video at this point, but I always like to invite Westerners to just try and get a sense for what's going on here. That's why I have the Western chart too. Charlie Sheen has Ketu in the 7th house with the benefic moon there, and Ketu's lord Jupiter, because Jupiter rules Sagittarius, that's where Ketu is. So this is an important axis, obviously. This says a lot about Charlie Sheen having Rahu in the 1st house. And also the lord of Ketu is it's with Rahu in the 1st house. Very strange. How I would kind of say it is that, we're going to kind of talk about it a little bit. That Jupiter is inauspicious to the Lagna. It's a benefic in the 7th. Usually what this means is that for a Gemini, they can be very blunt. We all know about Gemini rising, that they say right what's on their minds. Now, this Jupiter is a funny thing here because he can be sensitive to other people because it's the 7th lord in the 1st house, and it's Jupiter. Jupiter does very well in the 1st house. So Charlie Sheen probably has a very good personability. He's got a sociability. He has a good sense of others. Good sense of the people he's talking to and working with. Sometimes, in fact, he might be a chameleon and absorb other people and change to fit the people that he's with. He is an actor, after all. It's a great thing for an actor. Although it could be in some ways rather, it's ultimately it's a good thing if you have Jupiter on your first house. What it means, like I've said in another video, what it can mean is that Jupiter, life conspires to allow you to say what you want to say, to be who you want to be when you have Jupiter. I've got to check it. Life conspires to encourage you to say what you want to say. So Charlie Sheen, when he was very early, at a very, very early age, he's an actor. His father was Martin Sheen. Maybe when he was a baby, like at the earliest of being a baby, perhaps Martin Sheen and his mother were very like, oh, it's a baby, oh, what you gonna do? Oh, look, he's an actor too. He's just like his dad. And he might have just been encouraged to just say whatever is on his mind. Come on, speak, baby, speak. And then the baby speaks. This is the kind of thing we get with Jupiter in the first. There's an open door for you, allowing you to express yourself, the first house, especially through others, through the impetus and encouragement of others. And this would eventually build on his 10th house, because it's also the 10th house lord. Now, all of this is just, it's funny because this Jupiter is so good, but it is, this openness of Jupiter is the 7th lord for Gemini, which means he will be blunt with other people. It's a funny good and bad thing, but this is like a well-placed, inauspicious planet, because it is still inauspicious. The fact that K2 is there also makes it questionable. The moon gives it more sensitivity, but K2 being there can make a tight-assed person who's, because it's inauspicious to Gemini, Jupiter here is going to be too blunt and completely fearless and like mean. This person can be mean for the sake of status. They'll be mean in order to express themselves and step on others' heads and say, sorry, but this is the accurate reflection of you, and I'm going to say it because Jupiter is lazy about the 7th house here. The 7th lord as Jupiter through Sagittarius is like, anything I say is going to be fine because it's Jupiter, right? That's how Geminis are. They can be very witty and almost to the point of mean because of how knowledgeable they are of the other person and willing to say what's on their mind about it. There's a lot of speech just to speak to this Jupiter, but it is important because this is, this is the first lord we're talking about here, the first house. It's going to relate to the Mercury, and it's going to relate to everything in the chart because it's the first house once again. And it's Rahu and Ketu to boot. That's also important. So we can see here that generally Sheen's Rahu is more in tune with him, his Lagna, than his Ketu is. So it's probably easy for him to explore than it is for him to maintain his energy field. Although his Jupiter is arguably doing very well. So he's got a good Ketu. It's more of Mercury, as we're going to see. Mercury has got some trouble going towards it. It's got good things, but it's also got some trouble. We're going to see why in later videos. Not too bad, though. I always say Charlie Sheen's got lots of crazy things going on with him, but he's a celebrity for a reason. He got to where he is for a reason. Now, the point I'm trying to show here is that Mercury is okay with the Lagna and is auspicious to it, but Jupiter is inauspicious to the Lagna. But not only is Jupiter inauspicious to the Lagna, but it's starved in Gemini for its dignity. So while Rahu's Lord Mercury is delighted in Leo, although again, we're going to talk about more about these individual things. Not so much Jupiter. I just wanted to show that, this Jupiter, even though it's considered inauspicious to the Lagna, it's a benefic ruling the 7th and the 10th, and that's what makes it malefic, like we said. It's too lackadaisy about others and about its career, the 10th house, because Pisces also rules the 10th house for a Gemini rising, Pisces being ruled by Jupiter. So despite all this antagonism, Jupiter is still the great benefic, and it's important to any chart. There's a balance to be struck here between accepting Jupiter's blunt, positive nature as an expression tool but not being too carelessly blunt with relationships and about their social status and about their ego amongst others, which this hungry Ketu, being in Sagittarius, probably uses that to get a stability of themselves, to feel like they're on top of things, doing better than other people, winning, as we know about Charlie Sheen, right? It's almost like he has to feel like he's kind of winning against amongst others and gaining social status in order to feel like he's building and maintaining his energy field. That's Ketu. Ketu is the emotional fortress which we use to get around, and Rahu is what the goal is of that fortress. Every Lagna has a light and a dark side. We all have preferential houses based on the shape of the soul's mouth, the Lagna. Gemini rising is no different, but we have to use our inauspicious planets even though they are antagonistic to the Lagna. That's this whole point of this whole thing. So eventually in this series, we're going to determine the prosperity of the 3rd and 4th houses owned by Sun and Mercury, respectively, for Charlie Sheen, because he's a Gemini, of course, like I said. Right? The 3rd and the 4th houses. We're going to determine the prosperity of them and how they are, because they're both intricately involved in the outer planets Pluto and Uranus in this chart. The reason is because they're in mutual yoga. Leo is in the sign that Mercury rules. That should say rules. Oh, sorry, I see. So, Mercury is in Leo, the Sun is in Virgo. They're in a mutual yoga, and Virgo is where the outer planets are. So the Sun is the dispositor of Mercury, because Mercury's in Leo, and that's why both the Sun's health is necessary for Mercury and for Uranus and Pluto, and for this 4th house agenda that we've been talking about. Now this yoga stands on shaky ground because the 3rd lord, the Sun, is a yoga breaker, right? 1st, 2nd, 3rd house is Leo. Leo rules the Sun, so the Sun is the 3rd lord, and it's a bit of a yoga breaker for what is going on between these two. The 3rd house and lord in any chart is always inauspicious to the Lagna, basically. Basically always. I think that there would be general differentiations between that. But Charlie Sheen, of course, he must involve the Sun in his life and in this yoga. Mercury, his Lagna lord, his 4th house, he needs to express the 1st and the 4th house through Mercury. And Mercury's in Leo, which means it uses the Sun to channel all of this. And the health of the Sun is going to carry all of this stuff that Mercury is carrying. He can't isolate the goodness of Mercury as the 4th lord from the Sun as the 3rd lord, because they are in yoga. So it shows that yogas aren't always a good thing. We could say on one hand that the being in yoga with Mercury makes the Sun stronger, but we must also say that being in yoga with the Sun makes Mercury weaker, right? So this is what we're going to be talking about in this case study. So we're just about done here before I make my last note on yogas. To round out the agenda of the outer planets, it will be good for us to observe the agenda of their house lord, Mercury, through what's called the Bhava Yogas. This will surely combine the themes of the 4th house, which is Virgo, where the outer planets and the Sun reside. So this combines the 4th house with the evil 3rd house, and that's Leo, where Mercury is. All Bhava Yoga readings show a positive and a negative result possibility. Most Bhava Yoga readings are a bit of both, almost in the same way that the outer planet reading was, because this is what astrology is trying to teach us, folks. Anytime you get anything out of a cookbook, you have to consider it in the context of the chart. Don't ever take anything just for granted. You got to read it in the rich detail of the individual chart that you're talking about. So, with all that being said, part of our training with Ryan Kirksack involves anytime we're going to look at a planet, what we're trying to do is try to see the planet's agenda and see if there is capable strength, resources, meaning, purpose, value, desire. You know, dharma, which is like fire, artha, which is like responsibility and fiscal stability, kama, which is desire and enjoyment, and moksha, which is a feeling of liberation and ease based on the nature of the self and the spirit. If any, any prospect is bound to have little bits of these four things, ideally. So we have to use all these different dimensions of the self, and that's why whenever we do a reading, we want to see the deep constituents of these four directions as they present themselves in the planet that we're talking about, because that's part of the planet's agenda. Here we have Mercury as the fourth lord. It needs to express itself somehow. So what it's going to do is it's going to express itself through the third house. And this has everything to do with the agenda of the fourth house, which is where those outer planets are. Okay? So thinking back to our fourth house, having the outer planets in the fourth house and the agenda implied there from our first reading, now we have to consider, basically that was, Uranus in the fourth, lots of chaos in the house, lots of domestic issues that are reflecting internal emotional foundation issues, which are very hard to grasp, but can be dealt with energetically and are usually dealt with because of this in an ecstatic, ungrippable way. In a way that feels very chaotic and hard to maintain any kind of routine or stability. But over time, if the fourth house and its lord are well placed and positioned, this can build a deeply recurring routine sense of stability enough that can actually give a deeply enriching internal scope of experiences related to self-ecstasy and enjoyment. This is Uranus's good side and bad side. It's always going to be chaotic towards the emotional foundation, and if you can get on top of it, then the internal chaos becomes a rich sense of internal bliss that can be very good when well placed. But the deal is definitely relating to domestic issues and these sorts of things. Now, Pluto being conjunct Uranus is a thing in itself. But Pluto in the fourth house has the agenda to do the same fourth house reality, but it's through a deeply egoic mob boss feeling of helplessness and weakness in the face of authority and of a deeply felt sense of insecurity that can only be managed by going into what the fourth house represents, trying it, probably getting obliterated from it, but whatever gets obliterated has the smell of what you've been trying to build this whole time. And with Pluto, a positive thing would be if you have a crazy experience, but leech and learn the best of what that experience represented, then you can take that experience and modify it creatively towards anything that you want in your life and in your fourth house. Ill-placed fourth house lord would represent that this egotism never fully lets you get a sense of emotional fortification or the depths of true security that you want to get from inside yourself. So you use mob manipulation tactics to try and move around the people who are your foundation, which is your fourth house. It's not just your own emotional foundation, it's also the people around you. So this Uranus and Pluto energy wants to shake the domestic scene of Charlie Sheen, but it wants that to be okay. It wants there to be this shakiness, but to attract people in this life who can take it and enjoy it and further use it. Unfortunately, if it's ill-placed, then the people who he attracts are bound to use it and reflect its ugly, inauspicious side. Now, on its way to how does the fourth lord Mercury express, stabilize, and hold the content that is going to be this fourth house domestic issues and self-power and emotional root foundation? Well, the ruler of the fourth house in Charlie Sheen's chart, being Mercury, is placed in the third house. So now we are going to do a reading of what it's like to have the Bhava Yoga of the ruler of the fourth house placed in the third house. These also, I believe, come from Brihat Parashara Horashastra. I can't see the direct quote, but I believe that that is what these come from. So, for everybody watching, what we are looking for here is we're looking at the ruler, having the ruler of the fourth house, that being Mercury. What happens when the ruler of the fourth house is in the third house of Leo? We could also take a look at what it means to have the ruler of the fourth in the fourth and fifth house, because the house cusps are there. But this is just, that's the complex nature of astrology. For now, we're just going to deal with the Rashi chart and the equal house system, just so we can get a sense of what we're dealing with. Okay, ruler of the fourth in the third. It's going to have positive and negatives, and we're going to see a bit of both in Charlie Sheen. Usually, we will analyze the whole chart, see the characteristics of these, and then draw out which we think are going to be there, the positive ones and the negative ones. Ruler of the fourth and the third house. The Lord of Happiness in the sibling house. The Lord of Happiness is the fourth, the sibling house is the third. The one born is a valorous and virtuous one, joined with servants, and one who, illustrious, free from disease and charitable, has acquired wealth with his own hands. This is the kind of consciousness that having the fourth lord in the third house is going to bring, which we kind of know about Charlie Sheen. He's illustrious. Don't know if he's free from disease. Not that guy, I'm not sure. He can be charitable? I think so. Again, this is either positive or negative. We can see that there's an image here, and we can see that the person can either go towards that general image or not. But we probably can say that he has acquired wealth with his own hands through his work as an actor, which he did, right? So we can see positive influences include having skills and acquiring wealth through one's effort. Wealth being like a fourth house thing, a foundation of sorts, and the third house being wealth but also effort. Work may be related to the hands or manual skill, acting in particular. This person may be confident, virtuous, generous, at peace in one's heart. Definitely questionable. This person would be healthy, questionable. Mother helps build strong confidence. They have a strong mother. Questionable. I don't think Charlie Sheen had that great of a mother. I haven't researched it as much as I should. I should, all things considered, but right now I'm more focused on I have ideas of Charlie Sheen at least having a hard domestic life with himself and with his lovers and with his wives and stuff. As for his mother, I'm not sure. Charlie Sheen feels at home in teams or in groups of peers or siblings, enjoys changing residences, enjoys working with land, agriculture, and vehicles. It's a fourth house thing. I doubt that he's done any of that. Travel provides for education. Educational expenses are not wasted. So these would be ideally if his fourth house and the third house, which contains its fourth lord, are picture perfect. So they're not exactly. Let's see some of the negative side of having the fourth lord in the third house. Trying to channel the fourth lord through the aggressive third house. Let's see what kind of negative things can come about. This person moves from home to home too often, trying to find that perfect sense of home, that perfectly sense of peaceful tranquility. This is just perfect for me. Doesn't find it because the third house is always wondering and aggressively questioning. This person might be too emotionally charged or reactive because the fourth house is in the third. It's trying to grip and explore in a Gemini way for inner peace, which is always fleeting because of that. Frustrating mother. May lose mother or be separated from the mother. Education may be broken due to excessive desires. Maybe Charlie Sheen was doing a lot of drugs when he was younger and just skipped the whole deeper education thing. Perhaps he got well enough through his acting just by his father being an actor. This person can't sit still or stay in place long enough to be educated. Emotional peace disturbed by excessive desires and expenses. Third house, comma. Obstructing the fourth house, moksha, liberation, peace. A restless heart. Tries too hard to be happy or at peace. Wastes money on education. The education is a fourth house thing. Venus and Mercury are karakas of the fourth house. So this is all going to say that, you know, a lot of these negative aspects of having the fourth lord in the third house, he's got some of the good ones. And we'll see that the Mercury is not like the worst Mercury in the world, but it's definitely questionable. The fact that the sun is the one is channeling it gives it much more aggression, much more of this excessive desire energy. The sun is a hot planet that already can't be satisfied. It's a malefic there in the fourth house, in this mutual yoga especially. So the heat of the sun, the vata of the sun, kind of wrecks and destabilizes Mercury's fourth house even more, or the fourth house of the chart. So the nature of these outer planets, which is seeking to have this experience of instability, but stabilizing this instability. In Uranus's case, that's what Uranus is trying to do, is trying to have controlled chaos somewhere. But what happens with Charlie Sheen is he does the chaos part and then says, okay, I guess sometime here I'm probably going to find some control. And he doesn't really actively work on the control thing. And it ends up just being pure chaos. In the fourth house, relating to finding this inner peace and seeking it. For all we know, he could just have the money and the ability with his life to explore his hobbies and skills and interests. He could have been a good reader if his emotional disturbances weren't so heavy. With Pluto's case, it adds more egotism to this. A deep desire, like, I don't feel deserving of an emotional foundation because of Pluto's opposite pole being in the 10th house. Pluto and Uranus in the 4th have their opposite pole in the 10th house, and the evolution of the soul relates to authority from outside of the world, which is going to trigger the desire to have an inner security within oneself in order that they can deal with Pluto's opposite pole in the 10th house. Right? So, with all that being said, so we've rounded out that agenda, and we've talked a little bit about this fourth house and how this Mercury would seek through the third house to find the inner peace that the Gemini Lagna seeks. It's going to be an inner peace, but it's also going to be a self-expression. And it's in the third house. It's already on tough, unstable ground. The third house being not the best house for any important lord. The fact that it's in yoga with the sun, which is in its own house, is a funky thing that we're going to talk about further. And it does give these outer planets a hard time. Now, feel free to just give this a quick read. It's a word on Raj yogas, and what I've expressed as an auspicious yoga in previous videos. To see a truly active Raja yoga, where an auspicious angular lord is with an auspicious trinal lord. It's an advanced yoga interpretation. It's rare, but in order to when you do find a trinal lord, the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th lord, with an auspicious angular lord, it's the 1st, the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th, that's hopefully a malefic or something that's going to grip opportunity in the proper way. Once you find such a yoga, you would use this formula to quantify it. Now, Sheen doesn't have any Raja yogas, so it's useless to go into details on this formula here. But this formula is a critical part of defining, again, the crown jewel of the chart, which is Auspicious Yogas. So we're going to go into this in later case studies. I could go into a whole series on yogas alone and watch in case I do, because I think eventually I will. For now, I just want this series to be a general crash course on defining the outer planets in a chart through Vedic interpretation. So we'll be going into it more as we get along, folks. For now, this has been our class on Auspicious Yogas, being an umbrella term for the auspiciousness of the outer planet lord to the Lagna, and also yogas involved in it. These are important, dramatic, necessary parts of any description of an outer planet's agenda. Truth be told, what we should say in the end of this is that the yoga involving the sun really gives this Mercury a hard time, but the outer planets do exist in Virgo, which is auspicious to the Lagna. So let's keep that in mind. That's positive, and that's positive for the agenda of the outer planets, right? And that's something that we definitely need to consider, even though Mercury's auspiciousness, it falls into the third house, which is not auspicious. So I would almost give it a neutral reading, even though the outer planets themselves are in an auspicious place, right? We're going to be unfurling as we go on the nature of this neutrality and to see how it reflects in Charlie Sheen's life. For now, I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys on the next episode where we talk about the dignity of how the dignity of the house and lord reflects on the capacity of the house lord to channel the agenda of the outer planet that occupies it. Thanks a lot for watching, folks.